Okay, so I'd like you to imagine a place where systems leadership, emergence, and story are all happening at the same time. What do you see? What's coming up for you? Maybe an innovative startup like tech company or a forest, maybe a family road trip? Well, I see a strip club. A strip club. I just want you to take a mental snapshot of whatever came up for you, whatever reaction. We'll come back to it in a minute. So we gather in prestigious places like this to talk about systemic transformation. But rarely do we look to the corners of society that might be deemed a little unlikely for innovation. And that, my friends, is a systemic blind spot worth exploring. So I'll start with a little story. One night, working at a club, there was a group of businessmen that came in, and I think they wanted to have a little fun and stir the pot a bit. So they were trying to pit the dancers against one another. But instead of competing, and without any words at all, the group of us girls, us dancers, we made enough, communication to decide that we would actually stick together and we would share the tips at the end of the night. We would work the group as a group. So we chose cooperation instead of competition. And we recognized that these guys were manufacturing scarcity to try and play with power dynamics. And so we flipped the switch. We knew the leverage points, and it was emergent, it was in the moment, and that's what I call systems change in heels. So the strip club is like a little microcosm of the world. There's so many systems in motion. There's complex power dynamics. It's highly relational. It's a very embodied, intuitive, and a site of paradox, really. There's so many clashing truths that are coexisting at the same time. Through pleasure, power, and performance, a lot of things are flowing and happening. And it's operating within, around, underneath, and in spite of dominant systems. Now, everyone's experience is different. I speak today from mine. And the strip club, actually, the sex work industry as a whole is often overlooked, not because it lacks value, but because of the stigma that surrounds it. But instead of looking away, as stigma often encourages us to do, what if we actually saw that stigma as a signal? What can we learn by shining light into spaces that society keeps in the dark? So how did we get here? Well, I graduated from theater school and was working as an actor and a puppeteer, and I co-founded a performance ensemble where we made immersive, often future-set, queer work. And I knew that if I wanted to have a career in the arts, I'd have to throw my whole life into it. And that meant a lot of unpaid labor. And, I needed a job that would allow me to do that. And I had just finished years of training for the stage. So for me, it was like, well, let's go to the club. Different stage, better money. So by day, I was writing grants and running rehearsals and between auditions. And by night, I was twirling around poles, telling stories, learning about myself, my boundaries, other people. And let me tell you, it was quite a hustle on both ends, day and night. And I tried my best to keep these worlds quite separate, even though there was quite a bit of overlap. And it was exhausting. And after 6 years of this life, I completely burned out. That happened just around the same time as the pandemic came in. So all shows, all stages came to a close. And it was the first time that I was able to just pause, to breathe. And then after a few dark nights of the soul, a little spiritual awakening, and a bigger life move later, I found the SFI program here. I had no idea what it was, but I had a gut feeling to apply, and I was so surprised and pleased when I got in. But before school started, I started to get really insecure. I was like, am I professional enough? Are my skills too niche? Am I going to be taken seriously? I felt really insecure. How would my background as with, pretty unconventional experience fit into conversations in spaces where we were talking about policy, about business design, strategy, leadership? I was scared. But once classes started and my cohort was super welcoming and I had a great time, all of these sparks started to go off. I was like, wait a minute, the theater we were making was really like scenarios, It was crazy. We were doing all this stuff without even knowing foresight existed. And then, in conversations about leadership, we were talking about soft skills. And I would think, soft skills, why are they called soft? They're actually so hard. And they're core survival skills in the strip club and also in the theater world. Maybe they should be called hardcore skills. I don't know. So all these sparks were flying. I was so excited. I didn't know how to express or share these connections that I was making. It really felt like I was learning the alphabet for a language that I already spoke and knew. But since I wasn't sure what to do with that, it also dawned on me that I was harboring a lot of shame. A lot of shame about my background, my career choices, about the gaps that I felt my CV had. And I have to say that for all the reasons that people love to go to the strip club and the theater, working in those spaces comes with a certain weight. So as an artist, it's always been countercultural to choose a life less maybe traveled, especially if you're making underground, indie, queer theater. Add on the precarious lifestyle, the relentless rejection, always having to prove your self-worth. It's not a life for the faint of heart. And then, of course, as a stripper, the stigma is so real, and it comes up in micro and macro ways all the time. But here's the thing. Stigma is not personal. It's not random. It's systemic. It tells us when an identity, a behavior, or a truth threatens the status quo. And research shows that it not only shapes how we see each other, but also how we see ourselves. So I had internalized the stigma from a system. It didn't belong to me, actually. Stripping was a choice that I made, and it made sense to me to be able to pursue my aspirations as an artist. And people come into that space for different reasons and under different circumstances. But at the end of the day, we're there for economic reasons, and that is a systemic conversation. So I had internalized the stigma, but the question I wanted to ask and that kept coming up was, who was I serving? What beliefs and structures and narratives were I serving by not speaking up, by being quiet? So today when we talk about systemic transformation and decolonized futures and inclusion, I think that it's really important for those of us that can, that are safe to speak up, to disrupt narratives that contribute to the ongoing dehumanization and violence against sex workers from across the spectrum and across the world. What can we actually learn about innovative resilience, care, consent? What can we learn from those that we've been taught to distrust? So I'm here today to actually suggest that I think that the exact skills needed to change these systems are often found in places that we might not expect, like strip clubs. Where are sex workers when we talk about the futures of work or the care economy? How can we learn from people who use intimacy as infrastructure about conflict, about trust, about facilitation and communication? The exclusion of this industry is not accidental. It's literally there to maintain the very systems that we talk about transforming in programs like these. So what if we saw strippers and sex workers as high-value professionals? What if the wisdom, the grit, and the gifts that are cultivated in this line of work were seen not as liabilities, but as leadership strengths. And you know what? It's not actually that much of a leap. So I made this map when I learned to use Miro last year. And you can see there's like an overlap between the skills needed in theater, in the strip club, and also in systems change, kind of like broadly as I learned about it over the last 2 years. So the three of them are rooted in navigating real-time complexity. They're highly emergent spaces, rooted in relationship. And they're all experts in navigating uncertainty as well. Each is a site of paradox. They are constantly talking about fields of negotiation, whether it's consent, boundaries, capital, care, capacity. They're also very intersectional. These are spaces where a lot of different identities and worldviews meet. And if we look in the middle, this is a really clustered area, but there's a lot of this relational skill. So storytelling, emotional agility, presence, discernment, attunement. What other kind of jobs call for these very skills? For example, we might want someone on a board of directors to have those types of skills, or sales executives, hostage negotiators even. And when we talk about the skills that leaders in the future are going to be called for, there's a lot of overlap here too. Adaptability, collaboration, creativity, empathy. And so why does this matter? Because research, theory, and education are important, but it's actually that messy, working with each other, having those hard conversations, that gray space that makes people change how they behave, their attitudes about the world and what's possible. And the skills to facilitate that are not found in gigamaps or reports. They're on the ground, in action, with people that are actually living in the cracks of these systems that we seek to change. Lived experience becomes embodied knowledge. But if it isn't seen or recognized, if it's distorted or entirely erased because of stigma that is rooted from colonial and patriarchal beliefs, then it's a huge loss for everybody. So it comes down to what kind of experience and knowledge that we consider professional. Artists are the most overeducated and underemployed workers of our country. And even though there is amazing advocacy that's being done, and that has been done for a long time for sex workers, 93% experience stigma. This is not an invitation to extract or exploit knowledge and wisdom from these groups, but rather fold them in as leaders in systemic change in these spaces. And as a coach, I work specifically with sex workers and artists, and I've seen how scarcity and stigma subtly shape what we believe is possible. It doesn't just erode confidence, it actually limits imagination. It makes people be afraid to pivot, to say no, to ask for more, to dream. And so I started to introduce some of the skills, tools that I was learning in the program here, systems, strategy, and futures frameworks into these coaching sessions. And the frameworks didn't overwrite anybody's lived experience, but they actually helped articulate it. And they offered a different kind of form, a shape to a very intuitive, creative, and relational skill set that was already there. And the result was this kind of recognition, these light bulb moments, those sparks that I felt. And that was not because something new was added. It's because something true was finally seen. Everyone has a story, all of us here. And in all spaces, whether it's an interview or a VIP booth, we have to learn how to listen for it. Sometimes that means without words or CVs or credentials. It means challenging narrow definitions of value, knowledge, and professionalism. It means creating bridges and pathways like this SFI program was for me. We don't need to agree with people's choices to recognize and honor their humanity and their experience. And it also means looking closely at our relationship with stigma at how it shows up in our assumptions, our reactions, our language, who we hire. And it's also really important for us to just question what structures and systems that stigma upholds. What does it reinforce? Who does it honor? So go back to that first moment when I asked you to take a snapshot of your reaction when I first said strip club. What did you feel? What was your reaction? What did you think? And now, what do you know? The future is still unfolding. So let's make sure that we shine a spotlight on those that have been working in the dark. Thank you.